Hare Krishna. I'm Bhaktisiddhanta Dasa, a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. And I like to tell a few stories that memories that have lingered in my brain all these years. Prabhupada left 41 years ago, and we're celebrating every year Prabhupada's disappearance. But actually, I feel Prabhupada never left. I don't feel any lack of presence in Prabhupada. Behind me you see Prabhupada's Samadhi here in Mayapur. And at that time, after Prabhupada left, we installed the flowers from when he left the flowers, when he left the planet. That's a Pushpa Samadhi. When I came here, I helped put the dome up. The devotee at that time was Ranjit, and he was involved in the beginning of it and was the manager. So he decided he had enough management for his time here in Mayapur. He turned over the whole thing to me, and there was a checkbook and had to maintain the flow of the cement and the steel, and we put the dome up. So going back to the beginning, I met Prabhupada very casually in New York in 1966. I was walking near Tompkins Square Park, St. Mark's Place, and I walked by this unusual personality with white pointed shoes. It was Prabhupada. And I just walked by. I wasn't fortunate enough to stop and talk to him. But that was the first encounter. Then flash forward to 1973, where I got the first book, and we were lying in a hammock in Costa Rica in the middle of a jungle. And one devotee found us and said we were ready for something special. And so he did. He gave us a special mercy by giving us nectar devotion. And that was the second encounter with Prabhupada. And so finally, flash forward again to 75, we joined in Miami, and then ultimately I was transferred to LA to work on the books. CC, Chaitanya Charitamrita, was just beginning. And so Prabhupada heard there was an artist that joined in Miami, so I was flown directly after 2 weeks of being in the movement. And I started working with the painters, and then Fate started. So then that's shaped up, and I was transferred to Fate and working on the dioramas. And that meant changing body in the beginning. It was the first assignment. And Prabhupada came to the studio that year in 75 and 76, one or the other. And he gave us his mercy. He came, there was a Guru Puj, and it was packed in all around Prabhupada. I couldn't see anything. So I got up and I was about to get on the chair and look over the heads of everybody. I was always in the back. And suddenly it opened up, and Prabhupada just opened up like Moses in the Red Sea. And suddenly I'm face to face with Prabhupada. And looking at him, he looked back with an intense glaze. Excuse me. And suddenly my whole life changed. Just a simple glance from Prabhupada, and ultimately there was no turning back. Now it was a complete overhaul, a complete cleanse, internal, spiritual force immediately set in. Now I've talked to a lot of devotees, and they've had the same thing called the introductory offer. So Prabhupada was able to, in a flash, change a person's life. And that introductory offer came at a moment when I really wanted to get some kind of exchange with Prabhupada. And so that Prabhupada mercy came in many different ways. And so different occasions, Prabhupada's forces have carried me through life for the last 40-some years now. So when he was in his Dell studio in L.A., across from the street from the temple. He didn't hesitate to move on person, because I was telling my leader, Bhardaraj, that ultimately we made a mistake and we put all of our junk out on a patio that was a big, huge open area. And the course of taking Prabhupada around the area would be to avoid that space and come around through the work where all the dioramas were. So he went first off to the first diorama of the Chariot of the Senses. Now he looked at that diorama for about 10 seconds and walked over to the door that was locked and demanded that the door be opened. So outside that door was the patio, and this big pile of junk, or nartas piled up, 20 feet in right in the middle of this big, huge open area. So Prabhupada just pointed at it, reading our minds, obviously, and so just pointed at it and said, "Take care of this." And then he walked by it and walked right directly into the tool room where I was involved. So there he spent most of his time looking at the tools, asking questions, what's this tool for, and he saw pictures of the tools on the board. I had arranged everything. And then he moved towards the dioramas. And then he saw the one that Lochan did a Prabhupada, an earlier version of when he was at Radha Damodar. So, and he turned a switch, and there's a motor underneath the figure with a rod going through the body up to the head. It was a silicone rubber mold of the head. So the head could move. So when the motor turned, the rod went up and the head went up. And so Prabhupada looked at that and started laughing. I said, "Oh my gosh." And so it was a younger version of Prabhupada being seen by Prabhupada directly. Then he moved over towards the dioramas where I was working. I was working on a full-size changing body. And the small one, there was a small study I did before. And so he looked at that. And Bhardaraj said, "Would you like this for your room?" Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada looked at us and without a hesitation said, "My room?" And he gave like a real firm expression of he had no rooms. He had castles and palatial buildings all over the world, but there was nothing that belonged to him. He was completely renounced in every way. And so that ended that. Then we asked him questions about, like Lord Brahma, because there was small figures of the different demigods. And so he answered very simply. He says, "Why don't you ask him?" He says, "Why should I bother with the constables when I can talk to the Prime Minister?" So that meant he had access to Krishna directly. He wasn't concerned about, what's happened in the nitty-gritty. But we found out that Lord Brahma is 50 years old and enjoying his lunch right now, so we don't disturb Lord Brahma. Then there are moments like when he was giving class that he was giving class for the 2 years that I saw there in L.A. was 75 and 76. And he, in the middle of one class, about the third day into the first set in 1975, I looked around the room and everybody was sound asleep, nodding out, a dumb expression on everybody's face. So I looked at Prabhupada, and Prabhupada shook his head. What can I do? I mean, it was the communication through the mind. And so he just laughed and kept on with the class, and he wasn't talking to a bunch of sleepyheads, but he was talking to the world. So everything he spoke and was recorded is like a moment of history for the whole world to understand, and now to appreciate more and more the amazing achievements that Prabhupada did have. And the amount of literature that he dictated and it was printed, it'll take volumes of years to read and to understand even in one word. Prabhupada said like that, if you can understand one word, then you've achieved something. Just to touch any of his books is enough to start a spiritual life. So And then a few days later, Jagadish was given a class, and the same thing, everybody put everybody to sleep. And so I looked around, and all of a sudden, he fell asleep and his head hit the microphone. Boom! And so, Srimad Bhagavatam is a cure for insomnia, they say. So, but more on Prabhupada is that he had such a way with kids, and he was so wonderful, and there are a couple of choice stories about Prabhupada and children. One was with Saraswati when she was just a little girl. He said, you know, Saraswati, the garbage trucks in New York? No. So, well, they have a big, huge mouth, and they open up and they eat everything, close, and chew it. Just like you, you're always eating, your mouth is always open, and you're always chewing something. So you're like a garbage truck in New York. So she smiled and went out of the room, eating whatever she had in her hand. Then another one was a young sannyasi in London. Prabhupada's in his room talking to life members. In comes a 6-year-old boy dressed as a sannyas. And Prabhupada motioned him, come in, Maharaj, come in, take a seat. So he came in, he was looking at the gulabjamins that was in the pot on the Prabhupada's on his desk. And so he handed out one for each hand, and he thanked Prabhupada and walked out. A few days later, he was seen, Prabhupada's coming back from a morning walk, and this same kid is using his danda to bang his kids over the head. His friends were just threatening these other kids. And so anyway, Prabhupada asked for the father, and the father was standing right there, and he says, no, don't dress him like this again. This is a serious offense. He says, sannyas is not to be played with. Anyway, it's interesting the way Prabhupada could change from one episode to another, and then sometimes there was a heavy encounter with different devotees, and Prabhupada could heavy out anybody, and he heavied out most everybody, because that's the nature of the guru, is to be heavy. And so if you're strong, you can handle it. Some people knuckled under and just couldn't handle the intensity. Being with Prabhupada in a room with Prabhupada was like, it was like being in a high volume magnetic field where the vibration is so strong that ultimately it's pretty hard to survive in that environment. So Prabhupada was like that. A heavy energy was coming out of Prabhupada at all times. And so at some point there was an effulgence around his head, about an inch of light going around his whole head, and I saw that a few times. And when he walked, often he didn't touch the ground. I saw that in the morning walk in Los Angeles when he was walking down there at Venice Beach, up on the park area on the top. And so we came a little late, and there he was walking. But he wasn't walking, he wasn't touching the ground, he was floating along, walking, but not really touching the ground. And people, all the devotees behind him were like, you know, hurrying to catch up to him. That's why he walked so fast, and he never looked down. He didn't have to, because he wasn't touching the ground. And then in Bombay, walking on the beach, he left impressions in the sand. Then some places there was no impressions. And so that to be understood that he wasn't touching the ground only casually. And that was noticed by a few devotees, but not many. Then there are miracles that took place that, as we know, miracles are just something we don't understand. There's no such thing as miracles according to Prabhupada. It's just a matter of being able to perform the impossible with a little knowledge. Like walking, becoming lighter than a light. You could walk like Srila Prabhupada did without touching the ground. And so different miracles did happen. And one of these miracles happened in Atlanta with Rupa Nugas being temple president, I think. And so he was observing the disappearance festival of his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj. And he was offering artik to the picture of his guru. And so at one point he was asking, had water in a conch shell, so he wanted a bowl to put the water in. So he asked the temple president, bowl, I need a bowl. He didn't understand what he was saying. He said, bowl, bowl. And so everybody started jumping up and down, hurry, bowl, hurry, bowl. And so this is Prabhupada looking at these devotees and wondering, what's the hope here, you know? Well, that's a Yavanas, they got no taste for spiritual life and they don't understand much. In any case, he performed the artik, then he had to blow the conch shell, and they have a little conch shell that could be hardly blown by anybody. It was a mistake by putting it there on the tray. Anyway, he blew that perfectly with 3 blasts without taking a breath. And then he got up on the Vyasasan and sat and started to give the class. And so the class required the mridanga being played, so he started playing the mridanga, and it was really out of tune. It was bom, 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 bom. Just by playing that, he tuned the mridanga. So 3 miracles in one shot. And then he's asked by a great personality, why don't you come and visit me? You go all over the world, but you don't stop to visit me in Bhuvaneshwar. He's talking about Lord Shiva talking to him. So he did go to Bhuvaneshwar, and obviously Lord Shiva was very pleased by that. So here he is connected with Lord Shiva. Then one time a devotee was looking through the keyhole in L.A. when Prabhupada was in his room. He didn't want to disturb him, so he just looked through to see if Prabhupada needed anything. And so he looked through and he saw Prabhupada rolling on the floor. Now, why would you be rolling on the floor, he thought. So this devotee later went to Prabhupada and asked him, Srila Prabhupada, I didn't want to disturb you, but I was looking through the keyhole to see if you were okay. If you need anything, I would have come in. But I saw you rolling on the floor all by yourself. He said, oh yes, I'm sorry, but I was wrestling with Balaram. Now, wrestling with Balaram, talking to Lord Shiva, then his first preaching began in Jhansi. And so he's doing kirtan in the temple room they had there. And there was a big room, and he was like bouncing off the walls. He had this beautiful garland of kadamba flowers. Big, huge, big, bright, aromatic flowers that were like not available in that part of the world. So this first disciple, Prabhupada, I don't remember his name. Anyway, he looked at that and didn't want to disturb Prabhupada. He tried to get his attention, but he couldn't stop chanting, dancing, crying. I mean, he was in ecstatic. His hair is up on end, and he's like dancing, without any understanding of where he was. So later, and this went on, and he's just banging on the mridanga and chanting, and the flower, this aroma of that flower garland just permeated the whole building. So then the next morning he asked Prabhupada, what happened? Where'd you get that garland? He says, well, I was chanting and meditating on Krishna, and suddenly he appeared and brought me this garland. And I tried to touch his feet, and he disappeared. And after that, I couldn't hold back anymore. I was just gone. I've lost it. So I'm sorry about, I couldn't understand what you were talking. And so Prabhupada was like that. There was miracles galore. I mean, there's just one after another that took place. Another story is Prabhupada is on his way to see Bhaktivinoda's youngest brother, was living in a very remote area. And so they had to cross a bridge, but the bridge was water had washed away half of it. So it was an old Hudson, according to Shyamasunder, that he got everybody out of the car except for Shyamasunder who was driving. So he said, okay, back it up. And so they backed it up, and they said, I want you to go as fast as you can and jump the bridge. So he did that. He backed it way up about 50 yards and gunned it, turned it on full blast, and pedal to the metal. And so he jumped that bridge and went flying over the bridge and landed on the other side very perfectly. And Prabhupada never got out of the car. He just looked at it and he said, that's what we have to do. So they did that. They jumped the bridge, and then the sannyasis came around, walked through the gully, and then got in the car and they went. And so Then there's another one. When the devotees were, the first devotee group came to India, and they stopped in Cairo. And Guru Das talks about it being like a very unusual plane ride, because it was a prop jet. It was no jet engine, and the plane was just barely hanging together. And so when they got to Cairo, it was the day that Nasser died. So there was black bunning all over the place, and a big picture of Nasser. And so when they got out of the plane, they immediately started a kirtan in the airport, right out on the tarpon. And so then Guru Das tells a story. He's looking through he's taking a movie of it, and so he's looking through the viewfinder. You see all these soldiers coming after devotees with guns and with bayonets. And so immediately he thought, what would Prabhupada do in this situation? Now they're endangered. And so then he thought, okay. He stopped everybody and he said, listen, we're praising Nasser and glorifying your president and his disappearance. And so that pacified the soldiers. They understood a little English. And so then the kirtan went on, and they all stood around watching this whole thing take place. And so there's another story. Shama Sundar tells a story. Prabhupada goes to Switzerland. He says, you've taken me to hell. There's nothing but snow here. There's nothing that I can do in this place. What kind of preaching can I do? And so he says, well, listen, let's do one thing. While we're here, let's try to make some money. And so he goes to Shama Sundar. He tells him, try to go to the bank and make this deposit. We've got to put some money in the bank anyway. And so ask the bank president if there's anything that's going to happen soon that's going to make a change and might be a good investment.